In January 2008, the city of Reno, Nevada, was buried under snow. It was the kind of bitter cold that kept most people indoors after dark. But that winter, something else was moving through the city besides the wind. Within a few blocks of the University of Nevada, Reno, an unknown man had already attacked 2 women. He left almost nothing behind. No name, no fingerprints investigators could use, and no witness who could confidently identify him. Only a handful of unsettling clues and a growing fear that whoever he wasn't finished. No one in Reno knew it yet, but within weeks, that same man would commit a crime that would consume the city for the next year and launch one of the largest investigations in its history. This is the story of Breonna Dennison and the relentless hunt to identify the man responsible before he could strike again. Before she was a name on the news, Breonna Dennison was just a 19-year-old college student home for winter break. She'd grown up in Reno. Her father died suddenly when she was only 6 years old, and in the years after it was just her and her mother, Bridget. The 2 of them grew close in a way that people who knew them describe as more like best friends than mother and daughter. They talked constantly. They did things together. And by all accounts, Breonna carried that same warmth out into the world. The kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who friends describe as one of the kindest people they'd ever known. 2 years after high school, Breonna decided it was time to leave Reno. She enrolled at Santa Barbara City College in California, where she was studying psychology. She wanted to work with children one day. She had a boyfriend, a close group of friends, and a life that, from the outside, looked like it was exactly on track. Even from 300 miles away, she stayed close to her mother, texting her, sending pictures, checking in. It wasn't always easy for Bridget. She worried the way most mothers do. But there was comfort in knowing her daughter was happy. So when winter break came around, and Breonna flew home to Reno for the holidays, it was, for a little while, simply a good thing. A chance to see old friends. A chance to be home. Nobody watching her land at the airport that winter could have known it would be one of the last times. The weekend of January 18th and 19th, 2008, was supposed to be an ordinary one. Breonna and her friends had plans to go snowboarding during the day and spend the evenings together before she flew back to California. On Friday night, she stayed at the home of her friend, Katie, a house just off the University of Nevada, Reno campus, where several of them were staying that weekend. It was the kind of house where people came and went freely, friends dropping by at all hours, doors rarely locked. Nobody thought twice about it. It was just how the house worked. Saturday, Breonna spent time with her mother. They did laundry together, went to see a movie. That evening, she headed out again, this time to a concert with friends, despite fighting off a cold. Her mother remembers telling her she didn't have to go, that she could be sick tomorrow. But Breonna wanted to be there. Before she left, she hugged her mother goodbye. It was a small, unremarkable moment. Neither of them had any reason to think it mattered. After the concert, Breonna and her friends made their way to a party, and by the early hours of Sunday morning, she was back at Katie's house. It was around 3:30. Rather than crowd into Katie's bed with the others, Breonna decided to sleep on the couch instead. A couch that sat right next to a glass door. A door that, like most nights in that house, was left unlocked. At 4 a.m, she and Katie said goodnight. 20 minutes later, Breonna sent one last text message to her boyfriend, who was back in Oregon. And then the house went quiet. When Katie and another friend, Jessica, woke up around 9 that morning and made their way to the kitchen, the couch was empty. At first, nobody worried. Maybe she'd moved upstairs to an empty room. But as the morning went on and there was still no sign of her, That assumption started to crack. Katie knocked on the door she thought Brianna might be behind. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Still nothing. And that's when it started to sink in. Brianna wasn't in the house at all. Her phone was still there. Her shoes were still there. Her purse was still there. Katie called Brianna's mother, and while she waited for Bridget to arrive, she noticed something on the pillow Brianna had been using. Blood. Just a few small spots, but enough to change everything. Within hours, Brianna's mother, her aunt, and the police had all arrived at the house. There was no sign of a struggle in the room, nothing overturned, nothing broken. But a blanket Brianna had slept under was found, oddly, in the kitchen, and a stuffed bear she'd been using as an extra pillow was missing entirely. For investigators, the blood on the pillow was the detail that mattered most. It wasn't much, a few spots, roughly an inch or two across. But forensic analysis suggested it had come from an injury near her face, consistent with her face being pressed hard into the pillow. This wasn't the profile of someone who'd simply walked out on her own. This was the profile of an abduction.
She is one of the nicest girls, and if whoever did this is watching, she's so nice, just please. She wasn't there, and I noticed blood on the pillow, so we called the cops, and from there it's just been the nightmare.
Dennison goes to college in Santa Barbara, California, but she was in Reno visiting friends and family for the weekend. Brianna's friend says the front door was not locked that night. Her aunt says Brianna had also gotten a text message from her boyfriend that night.
Just awful. They were breaking up kind of stuff, and he just was saying awful things to her, calling her all kinds of names and stuff like that. He was just jealous and young.
Authorities say Brianna left behind her purse, cell phone, and some clothing. Dennison's family is not giving up hope, but said they are confused by the events of the night.
Police swabbed the back doorknob for DNA and got a hit, an unknown male profile. They ran it against the state's database of prior offenders. Nothing matched. They ran it against the national database. Still nothing. But detectives noticed something else almost immediately. This DNA wasn't just unidentified. It matched evidence from 2 earlier, unsolved attacks, assaults that had happened just months before, within a few blocks of where Brianna had been staying. That changed the entire shape of the investigation. This wasn't an isolated crime. Somewhere in Reno, there was a man who had already attacked 2 women near the university, and now, police believed, he had escalated to abduction.
Instead of advertising the performers, electronic billboards around Reno, Nevada now show the face of a missing college student. 19-year-old Brianna Dennison was last seen early Sunday morning. Friends are worried.
Every day we start out first thing in the day and we organize the media, we organize what we can do, what resources we have, we check in with the police.
Dennison's cousin spoke with her nearly every day.
We said, we love you. I said I love you, and she's like, I love you too, and we were going to talk soon.
A makeshift memorial is growing where Dennison was last seen.
If Brianna's watching, I want her to know that I love her, that I miss her, and that we will bring her home.
To understand what investigators were now dealing with, it helps to go back further, to 2 attacks in late 2007 that at the time had seemed unconnected to anything else. In November of that year, a 21-year-old student was grabbed from behind in a parking lot and pulled to the ground before her attacker fled when she began to scream. The following month, in December, a 22-year-old exchange student was attacked just outside her own home. She was rendered unconscious, driven a short distance in a truck, and sexually assaulted before being released. She managed to give police a description: a white man with facial hair and tanned arms, along with details about the vehicle. A distinctive radio with red and blue lighting, and a child's shoe on the floor. DNA collected from that assault would later prove to be the same DNA found on the doorknob at the house Brianna had disappeared from. Investigators also began to suspect the same man was behind an attempted break-in at the exchange student's home weeks earlier. Someone had tried to force the back door open with enough force to bow it outward.
Police think she was abducted by a serial rapist linked to a string of attacks near the University of Nevada. The cases are all linked by DNA.
Piecing it together, police now had a working profile. A white man, likely between 28 and 40 years old, roughly 5'6" to 6 feet tall, driving either an SUV or an extended cab pickup. Someone who, by every indication, was not acting on impulse. Someone whose violence was getting worse with each attack. With that profile in hand, and Brianna still missing, Reno turned into something few cities ever have to become: a community searching, in real time, for both a missing young woman and the man who had taken her. What followed was one of the largest search efforts the city had ever seen. Volunteers by the hundreds combed the Truckee River, fields, drainage ditches, and manhole covers. K-9 units and helicopters joined local search and rescue teams. The FBI and investigators from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children were brought in. More than 5,000 tips came in. Over 700 men voluntarily gave DNA samples in hopes of ruling themselves out and narrowing the search.
DNA evidence is linking the suspected abduction of a missing college student to 2 attacks on women near the University of Nevada, Reno last year. 19-year-old Brianna Dennison disappeared on January 20th from a friend's home. Police say that her case is linked to a sexual assault in December and an attack in November. Now, police have released this sketch of the suspect and a separate attack near the university back in October. Investigators believe that this person could be tied to the other 3 cases.
Local authorities are appealing for money to help clear a crime lab backlog. They have almost 3,000 DNA samples to process. One could match Dennison's kidnapper.
This community has come together in so many ways to look for everyone's daughter. And I think the Brianna Dennison case has emerged as everyone's daughter.
For Brianna's family, hope remains for clues.
I'm confident in every lead, everything that comes our way every day, that it's going to be the key to open this wide up.
The local crime lab, sitting on a backlog of roughly 3,000 untested samples, received $150,000 in community donations within days, just to help process evidence faster. And yet, none of it produced a match. One detail from those early weeks has stayed with investigators since. The house next door to where Brianna had been sleeping was home to a man who, in the early hours of that same morning, had been sitting in his living room with the lights off. He noticed a shadow outside. Then someone tried to force his door open. At the time, he assumed it was a drunk stranger who had the wrong house, and he didn't get up to check. It was only later, once the pattern of attacks became clear, that the moment took on a very different meaning.
Welcome back. It's been nearly now a month since California college student Brianna Dennison disappeared in Reno. And joining us now from Reno is Brianna Dennison's mother, Bridget, and Brianna's uncle, John Zanino. Bridget, let's start with you. Where is this investigation right now? Bridget, do you believe that investigators have told you everything that they know? Are you comfortable with how this is all being investigated?
I'm extremely comfortable with how it's being investigated. I doubt that they've told me everything. I'm sure there's, plenty that they're looking into. I'd like to speak to my daughter's abductor that it's time to give her back. We miss her and we love her. We know she's hurt, and it's time to give her back to us. We need her.
On February 15th, 2008, a construction worker named Alberto Jimenez was cutting across a vacant lot on his way to grab lunch. Something in a shallow ditch caught his eye. A Christmas tree, lying on its side, out of place among the winter brush. As he got closer, he noticed something else near it. At first he thought it might be a mannequin. Then he saw a wound. and he understood immediately what he was looking at. Brianna's body was found in that field, 8 miles from where she'd been taken, less than 10 miles from the campus, where 2 other women had already been attacked.
There is a possibility that it could be missing college student Brianna Dennison. This is the field where they found that body, and it was on the edge of the campus of the University of Nevada. That's less than 10 miles from the house where Dennison was last seen.
An autopsy confirmed what the city had feared for nearly 4 weeks. She had been sexually assaulted, and she had died by strangulation. Investigators believed she had been killed inside the house, and her body moved afterward. Beneath her, they found 2 pairs of women's underwear, one belonging to Katie, taken without her knowledge, the other belonging to someone investigators were never able to identify. It wasn't simply left behind. It had been deliberately placed in a way that made clear the person responsible wanted it found. For police, that detail changed how they understood the man they were looking for. This wasn't only violence, it was a signature, almost a message left behind on purpose.
We just see her face and we see someone we love.
It's a small memorial to a young woman some say was like family.
I remember her mom saying she became America's daughter, and in reality she did. She's everyone's daughter, she's everyone's sister.
And now residents are left coping with the loss.
I cried. I sat in my living room. I was home by myself and just cried.
As some tried to bring closure to a case that's captured the hearts and minds of many here,
the spot where Brianna was found became a memorial almost overnight. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes. Signs that had once read, "Bring Bree back," were quietly repainted to read, "Bring Bree justice."
We've got to take on some urgent business in Reno, Nevada. Cops need your help to hunt down the killer of 19-year-old Brianna Dennison.
It seems as if everyone in Reno, Nevada is in a state of mourning.
It's just been unbelievable as how Reno has come together to help one family.
Thousands have turned out to pay tribute to this beautiful teenager whose life was taken too soon.
She was always an angel on earth that protected us. Now she's with her father watching over us.
There have been a series of vigils and memorials as people continued to struggle with their grief.
For months afterward, the case went quiet, not because investigators stopped working it, but because the leads simply ran out. More than 40 detectives and FBI agents continued the investigation. Thousands of tips had been logged, none of them led anywhere. On November 1st, 2008, more than 9 months after Brianna disappeared, a woman called Nevada's Secret Witness tip line. She told police that a friend's boyfriend had been acting strangely and that her friend had recently found 2 pairs of women's underwear hidden in his truck. That single tip was the beginning of the end. The man named in that tip was 27-year-old James Michael Biella, a pipe fitter, a former Marine, and someone with a documented history of aggression, including a prior arrest for threatening a former girlfriend's neighbor with a knife. He had trained for a time in jiu-jitsu and knew the university campus well, having worked construction there the year before. When detectives first reached him by phone, something about his response struck them as odd. He never asked what the investigation was even about. When he met with officers in person days later, he refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample and claimed he'd been with his girlfriend on the night Brianna disappeared. His girlfriend told police that wasn't true. She did agree, however, to let investigators collect a DNA sample from the son she shared with Biella. Using that sample, detectives were able to determine that the child's biological father was almost certainly the same man whose DNA had been left behind at the crime scenes. On November 25, 2008, as Biella arrived to pick his son up from preschool, he was taken into custody. This time, a DNA sample was compelled. It matched.
Reno, Nevada police say they have arrested a suspect in the kidnapping and killing of a 19-year-old college student. Police issued a statement overnight announcing a news conference Wednesday morning on the arrest of a suspect in the slaying of Brianna Dennison. Investigators said DNA evidence gathered from the scene linked Dennison's killer to 3 other sexual assaults on women at or near the campus from October to December 2007.
Notably, investigators later learned that back in March, right around the time police had publicly released the composite sketch and details about the underwear left at the scene, Biela had abruptly quit his job and relocated to Washington State, later selling the truck he'd been driving. At the time, it looked like nothing unusual. In hindsight, police believed it was exactly what it looked like, a man who felt the pressure closing in. The trial, held in the spring of 2010, brought the full weight of the evidence into a single courtroom.
Who is James Biela? We're learning a whole lot about the man charged with Brianna's murder. Brandon Rittiman talked with Biela's father today and with his neighbors. Brandon, give us an idea of James Biela's background.
Well, Wendy, neighbors say they rarely, if ever, saw Biela, and it's really the same story from his father, who says it's been a year or so since he saw his son, Jimmy. Be warned, you may find some of the father's language offensive.
Joe Biela had a handful of family photos to share with us, and after learning of the arrest, he gets pretty heated when he sees his son, James.
Jimmy, that's the little asswipe that killed that girl. Too bad, but he did.
Joe suffers from mental and physical disabilities. Hurt describes how Joe Biela felt when he saw his son Jimmy's picture on TV, arrested for murdering Brianna Dennison. Biela says he and his son were not close. Joe knows that James was a plumber, but not much else about his son's life.
Is that his kid he's holding? Hell if I know.
Father and son are both ex-Marines. Joe has his honorable discharge on the wall, but says his son, seen here in uniform, was kicked out.
Yeah, for doing drugs. I do drugs too. You name it, I done it. But I don't get caught.
And one neighbor did notice Biela was away for a few months. That was during the time police say he was up in Washington State. The neighbor didn't think anything of it, thought Biela may have possibly been away for military duty. Covering the big story live in the newsroom, Brandon Rittiman, Channel 2 News.
DNA linked Biela to all 3 attacks, the 2 earlier assaults and Brianna's murder. Fiber evidence recovered from his truck matched fibers found on one victim's clothing. 2 surviving victims testified, one of them identifying Biela directly as the man who had attacked her.
But first, let's go out to the courthouse for the latest from the trial. Brandon, what did we learn about the 2 rapes Biela is accused of being part of?
Well, first and foremost, we got some information on how police linked Mr. Biela to the December 2007 rape. And we can show you some pictures here from court earlier. Biela, watching as the chief investigator, testified about flying to Taiwan to interview the 22-year-old victim of that December rape, who testified yesterday.
She felt a moral obligation to cooperate in the hopes that this person could be caught and not hurt anyone else.
Detective Jenkins is talking about the rape victim who was the first person to testify in this case. Because she's the victim of an alleged rape, we've concealed her identity. There is another rape prosecutors charged Biela with committing. We have not yet heard from that victim, though the detective did describe her as much more reluctant to come forward.
His former supervisor testified that on the same day Brianna's body was found, Biela quit his job, and when asked how he felt about the discovery, responded that she probably had it coming, before cracking a smile.
Prosecutors called Biela's former supervisor, John Latham. Latham said on February 15, 2008, after Brianna Dennison's body was found that same morning, Biela quit his job, took his last paycheck, and moved to Washington State. Also that same day, Latham talked with Biela about the discovery of the body.
I asked him how he felt about her being found, and his comment was that she...
And I know there was some colorful language. Say exactly what he said.
The bitch probably had it coming.
Then he says Biela cracked a smile. The defense asked Latham whether he reported it to police.
No, I did not. He always had that sense of humor, and a lot of guys have that kind of humor.
And we've heard testimony that the defendant kind of fancied himself a bit of a comedian. He was a funny guy. So the bitch probably had it coming might be a very poor attempt at humor from anybody other than the person who strangled the life out of Brianna Dennison. You could probably apply that to all three victims in this case. He probably figures that all three of them had it coming.
After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts.
And again, a jury of 7 women and 5 men. They've selected a foreman to hand down the verdict. It took them more than 6 hours. Apparently they are walking in right now. And then we should hear the verdicts momentarily.
We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant, James Michael Vila, guilty of count 1, sexual assault. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant, James Michael Vila, guilty of count 2, kidnapping in the first degree. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant, James Michael Vila, guilty of count 3, sexual assault. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant, James Michael Vila, guilty of count 4, murder in the first degree of Brianna Zunino Dennison. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter, find the defendant, James Michael Vila, guilty of count 5, sexual assault on Brianna Zunino Dennison.
During the penalty phase, Biela's own siblings testified about a childhood marked by an abusive household. His defense argued that history should weigh against a death sentence. The jury disagreed. James Biela was sentenced to death. Outside the courthouse, Bridget Dennison spoke to reporters. "When James Michael Biela messed with my little girl," she said, "he messed with the wrong family, the wrong women, and the wrong city and state." Months later, a separate sentencing addressed the 2 earlier assaults directly. Life with the possibility of parole, layered on top of the death sentence, specifically so that even if the capital conviction were ever overturned on appeal, Biela would still serve significant time for what he'd done to his surviving victims. One of them, addressing him directly in court, told him that although he hadn't murdered her, he had permanently changed who she was in the moments before the attack. In the years that followed, Bridget Dennison turned her grief into advocacy. She became the driving force behind what's now known as Brianna's Law, Nevada legislation requiring DNA samples to be collected from anyone arrested on a felony charge, rather than only after conviction. Signed in 2013, the law was built directly on the lesson of Brianna's case, that a backlog of untested DNA sitting in storage while a predator remained free may have cost precious time that could have saved a life. There is one more difficult chapter to this story, separate from the case itself. 10 years after Brianna's abduction, her cousin, Caitlin Dennison, disappeared under her own troubling circumstances after traveling to Texas with a man she'd recently met. As of this recording, Caitlin has never been found. Her case remains open and unrelated to James Biela. But for a family that had already lived through one unimaginable loss, it was a second wound they never should have had to carry. Every true crime story, if it's told honestly, should leave you with more than just the facts of what happened. This one leaves a few lessons worth sitting with. The first is small, but real. An unlocked door, in a house where nobody thought twice about it, was the single point where someone got in. It doesn't mean the world is unsafe. It means the ordinary precautions, locking a door, even at a friend's place, even somewhere that feels completely safer, are worth the small effort they take. The second is about pattern recognition. James Biela had a documented history of aggression years before he ever became a suspect in this case. Violence like this is rarely the very first thing a person does. It's usually part of an escalation, and one of the reasons this case took as long as it did to solve is that pieces of that pattern were scattered across different reports, different years, different jurisdictions, without ever being connected until it was almost too late. The third is about the value of an engaged community, thousands of tips, hundreds of volunteers giving up their own DNA to help rule themselves out. And in the end, it was one more tip, from someone close to the person responsible, that actually closed the case. Public involvement in an investigation isn't symbolic. It's often what makes the difference. And the last lesson is really about what Bridget Dennison did with her grief. She didn't just wait for the system to change, she helped write the change herself, in the form of a law that now applies to every felony arrest in Nevada, a law built specifically so that the next investigation wouldn't have to wait as long as this one did. Breonna Dennison was 19 years old. She wanted to work with children. She never missed a birthday. And more than a decade later, the law that carries her name is still doing exactly what her mother hoped it would, giving the next investigation, somewhere else, a chance to move faster than this one did. That's where we'll leave her story tonight, not with what was taken from her, but with what came after because of her.